Well, it's not often that small independent brand creates a digital watch. I think the last one that I've seen was from Autodromo. Rather than just do a straight review, I think there's a lot of questions around this watch. So I would love to introduce Huiy from RZE. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time to review the watch as well as have a conversation with us about it.
Well, let's start off. It's been a while since I reviewed an RZE watch. I think it's been quite a few years, but very impressed with the titanium construction. The brand has been. How long have you been going now? It must have been five years or so.
Yeah, we were founded in 2020, so height of the pandemic, like a lot of brands, and Travis, my co-founder, came in and wanted to bring something unique to the market, and at that time it was uncommon to have a hard coating on a lot of different watches, and so we've seen that progress. Travis, inspired by tegimented steel and kind of the hardening process, and knowing the weakness in titanium being scratching, Travis wanted to mitigate that, so we worked on UltraHex, which is our proprietary coating.
It's such a funny thing in the watch community, isn't it? Titanium, because you're a shining example of this, but you can get some really well machined titanium cases on affordable watches like the watch that we're looking at today. But then the bigger brands still make a real song and dance about the titanium and the difficulty of machining it and the special tooling and everything. So must find that amusing.
Oh, absolutely. I think of course, the raw material is going to be more than stainless steel or whatever. But I mean, it's the same thing as even like a date or anything like a precious metal, is that really it's not necessarily the material so much as, like you said, the expertise in machining or working with that material. And when you do different things like stainless steel and titanium, you get a issue of sometimes if you're Tudor or Squale, for example, when they do the master titanium and stuff, you're naturally going to be comparing that back escape or iconic case construction to something else. So it has to be comparable, if not better, or if not, you need to market it as better, or why would anyone pay for it? It's like, I think the Black Bay in 18 karat would be a great example too. You don't really know how many of those Black Bays in gold are being made, and they could meticulously spend all the time in the world working on it just so that you could pass them off to those people. But for us, everything we do is titanium. And so it is partly that is that we've invested the research and development and effort to just hone our skill in titanium, but also it comes from thinking about what you want to achieve with that case material, regardless of what it is, whether it be carbon or whatever. It's like, yeah, you can make a junk case out of carbon, or you can make an incredible carbon forged case or whatever. It's all levels to it, right? And so for us, I think what's more hilarious than the whole like pricing difference of titanium and stainless steel, because obviously there's lots of brands who've been doing it affordable as well. It's tougher to find now, but Citizen Super Titanium is a good example. It's not much titanium. It's very light, and you can get it at quite affordable point, but it's not the best, but you also know they make it. And so one of the things that I think is interesting is that when we look at grade 2 titanium versus grade 5 titanium, that's what always comes up with titanium. And so a lot of people will come to us and say, well, your cases are made out of grade 2 titanium. Well, they can't be that good then, because they're not grade 5. And it's like you have to have a certain amount of knowledge to get into the titanium game. And then you have these people who are deep in the niche that are like want to say like, well, it's not grade 5, and it's much like blade steel or anything like that. There's levels to it, but in technical applications of titanium, it's almost indistinguishable. And there is a marginal hardness factor as well as like a marginal kind of strength difference at the end of the day for grade 2 and grade 5. But after you hard coat it, the substrate level, which is what you're going to experience the most difference in, when we hardness coat it, 1200 hardness factors, it's actually harder than grade 5. And so when you ask someone like, what is the purpose of why would you want it to be grade 5? They don't really know. It's just a spec. And so for us, it's just an aesthetic thing. Like, and of course, it's substantially more difficult to work with, and it's more expensive. But from a watch ownership standpoint, it just doesn't matter unless you really want to be able to polish the surface. And that's where something like the titanium Marine Masters and stuff that Seiko have, like with the Zaratsu polished titanium, where it makes a difference. You need to have grade 5. And so that's something that's, I guess, more down into the weeds than the whole stainless steel versus titanium.
When I first saw this watch, I'm amazed that you've gone down the digital route, because very few, I can only think of Autodromo as another sort of small independent like yourself that actually went down the digital route. How did you come up with the idea and then just sort of take it through to full production?
Well, I think one of the things that we looked at, especially in our brand, is the identity was to take weakness and turn it into strength. And one of those things would be like titanium's weakness is scratch resistance. So we wanted to amp that up. And so we coated it. And so one of the things that a lot of people will say about a traditional watch is that not shock resistant or it's not vibration resistant. And, there's a lot of people talking about things that are silly, like for example, you can't play golf with a watch or something like that because of shocks. Like, yeah, I mean, like there's going to be shocks, but there's all kinds of dampening and all kinds of things and those kinds of levels. But then there is the level of, can you wear it while using a jackhammer? And that's the reason why people buy things like G-Shocks and Timexes and things. And so one of the things that we talked about is like, how do you really do this tough adventure tool watch thing to the absolute limit? We can make thicker, harder cases and thicker sapphire and stuff, but what we thought about is there's no way to really make more of an anti-shock kind of mechanical movement or anything within the realm of possibility of what we can do. And so being lifelong watch enthusiasts, an 8-lap was my first watch. I've always had a digital watch in my life, or several. MRGs are obviously the top bar of that. When we think about an MRG or regular G-Shock, all of those things are still a G-Shock, and that whole idea of creating that built tough thing, we wanted to try to find a way to make a shock-proof and shock resistant as well as temperature resistant. Being from Canada and that was something that was always touted as like, oh, low temp resistance, like no fade out display and stuff. So we kind of put together a list of things that we wanted to do that wasn't realistic to do in a traditional tool watch of mechanical nature. And we thought there's no way we can do this without going digital. And, Quartz is kind of halfway. Spring Drive is also kind of halfway, but we can't get that. So naturally, the only kind of entry point would be digital. And we have so much inspiration from even like the GW-1000, it's like pre-G-Shock Casios and stuff to draw from to create something that we really loved. And so that was kind of what led us to the UTD-8000.
Yeah, as soon as I saw this watch, it reminded me of the original MRGs, G-Shocks, although I've had a few over the past and they are tiny, I guess in modern standards. So this has a lot of little nods to that watch as well. But I think we definitely need to go into the actual engineering of this watch because there's a lot of little details in this watch that actually I think raises it a little bit above those G-Shocks, the way that you've machined it and also the movement that you've had made. Let's start with that movement. So is this a custom one that you've had made for this watch?
Yeah, so we started with what factory had available and then it's been customized. And one of the things is the key features we wanted to address, like as we previously discussed, was like the shock resistance and the vibration resistance, because we looked at the formula from Casio and the idea was that if we could get the case construction and the shock resistance and all those things right, we can work on the electronics later. So we wanted to start with kind of a basic, no frills, no gimmicks module and then make it robust. So one of the things that you noted was its size, like this is substantially larger. And so kind of working with kind of a movement, customizing it, and then telling the factory like, okay, so we want it to be shock resistance, vibration resistance, low temp resistant and stuff. And so you're going down all of these roads of like, don't you just want a cheap digital module? And it's like, no, we don't. And that engineering process or that research and development process is something where it's way more challenging than someone thinks. And I think it's maddening because you sometimes go down comment section of some of the, when we're launching something and they're like, well, this just looks like a module that is taken out of something off of Amazon and you just put it in there. And I'm like, I hate to use the meme, but it's like one does not simply just take a module and put it in there. And even if it did, it wouldn't be able to do all those things. And it's so easy to say, well, it doesn't have a clock countdown timer, it doesn't have this, and it doesn't have that, which all require programming. And hypothetically, when you get there, I mean, it is just programming, but do you want it to resist all of the things? Or do you want it to have a complication that you use once in a while? And I know that there's people that use it every day, but for us, we thought about it from a standpoint of we want to be able to guarantee this module for life. We want to guarantee this thing for all conditions. Let's focus on that first. And that was kind of the part where we had to reverse engineer, start with that, figure it out and then look at the case construction. And so one of the things that you touched on is the complexity of case construction. And I know that there's a little bit of conversation online about the screws and how they are real. And so they're real in that they're fasteners that are holding the case, but they're not real in the sense that they're actual screws. So one of the things that people think is like, oh, it's so impressive that they're aligned, and it is, but at the same time, it's one step above the molding, like of G-Shock, and MRG has gotten to the point where it's screwed straight down. But if you watch the exploded video, it's a much better representation of what it actually is, which is kind of like pins that go down and hold the case together, because we're at the place right now when we're talking about, like, if you look at the movement and you were to go ahead and open up the case to change the battery, for example, which is a self-serviceable thing, you'll notice that the movement holder takes the entire thickness and everything. It's filled right up. And so that is full, and with the dampener and things like that, and it doesn't allow us to do screws straight down because there's limitations to manufacturing. And so when we start working on that, you start realizing, why is it that an MRG is so much more expensive than a regular full metal or something like that? It's because, how do you accommodate those screws? And how do you accommodate them with a movement holder? And it's all easy in principle, but when you start to squeeze those things in, when people say like, oh, I just wish it was like 40 mil, like 41, like 39 or anything, and when it's mechanical and you have a fixed entity of say at a 24, um like an ETA movement, and you know exactly what it's going to be, you kind of work off of that. But when it's like something that's an unknown entity and you're kind of like customizing something, you have no choice. You're kind of like, oh, how do I squeeze this in and maintain this aesthetic? And there's compromises that need to be made. And so one of the things that's really interesting that you'll see in the case construction is a detail that a lot of people will miss, is if you look at the bezel, it overhangs over where the end links go in on the bracelet just slightly. It's just like a 0.5 millimeter, and it needs to be that way so that you're able to have the proportions properly and you're able to have the screws aligned in a certain section, and so that when the link goes in for the bracelet, it sits underneath and it's like a slick thing. But it's not easy to kind of like look at that when you're looking at something flat in 2D or in CAD or anything like that.
Yeah, the bezel is super cool as well, because you've got that secondary layer on. I've got the blue version, and on the blue version there's a blue metallic disc. And I've seen Ben at Ben's Watch Club on his In the Loop channel, his yellow one has that yellow rim as well. It's a subtle detail that is really cool. Does that have a functional reason that there's that disc, or was it was aesthetics?
It's just aesthetics. And so because we have the fastener and piece or multi-component and case construction and stuff like that, we wanted to really showcase how we could push capacity of complication and production ability, and to kind of show that our goal is to get to like a crazy MRG level. If we get there, then it really will fasten all these things down, and there is kind of a madness to it that we wanted to kind of be like, okay, well, we can't get it any thinner, but what kind of je ne sais quoi can we put in there that kind of, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. If you see that thing and you realize to put that anodized piece of aluminum, you got to anodize that aluminum, you got to get the color right, you got to stick it in there, and then you got to make sure that none of this is going to fall off. And yeah, it's aesthetics, but also it's just an engineering feat, because that's something that when we see what MRG does and they lay out all the exploded parts, of course we're inspired by it. We look at that and are like, oh man, I just want all of these individual pieces to make this incredible thing. So it sets out a roadmap for us as much as it sets out an aesthetic kind of tone that we want to take this to, umpteen levels above this.
Yeah, and one of the other things as well, as we're sort of talking about the case, which you definitely do not get with G-Shocks in this price range, and this starts at $210 US dollars on the elastic, which I think is quite cool that you've done that, because it's obvious that there's a lot of, I've seen other RZE bracelets before, and there's an incredible amount of engineering in them. So I think it's quite cool that you've made it accessible if you want it on the elastic, and then you're like, hey, if you want to kick this up a notch, you can get the titanium. We've obviously put a lot of effort into this, so that takes it up to sort of 375. So you put it as about accessible. But even at 375, I can't think of another G-Shock, and I review a lot of G-Shocks on the channel, that have sapphire on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that you touched on it really well when you talk about the bracelet and stuff is that we wanted to hit two audiences, which would be the G-Shock or the digital watch audience, as well as the watch enthusiast audience, or someone who is looking for a more traditional mechanical watch, or like an Breitling Aerospace is a great example. We're inspired by these things, so I'm just going to say them. If you look at the braceleted watch, it wears so much like our other watches. And the reason is because that bracelet is the same bracelet as our Endeavor. And we tried to maintain our, design language and stuff like that. So really, when you're wearing that, it's not really that different than one of our dive collections. Like I'm wearing the Frigate Gray Endeavor, and it kind of feels the same size, has similar weights and stuff. And so that way you can have something that is what we look for in an MRG, or what we look for in that full metal, is that you're getting a kind of the same time function complication. Of course, it has all those other things, but in reality, you're just getting a complication in that traditional watch sense. And so we wanted to create that, as well as have the entry level of how do you experience a full metal, or the half metal jacket, or whatever top end G-Shocks, without and experience that in a really refined way, to almost like, I wanted to excite people to want to go into the world of like, wow, what if I went into mechanical watches? Like, wow, sapphire? Like, why sapphire? Why are these things? This is the second hardest material. Like, we want people to go in and do these scratch tests on and things like that, because it makes people learn about the specs that make us enthusiasts.
You mentioned about the battery being user replaceable, and I'll throw some image. I'm not brave enough to open this one up yet, but I'll throw some images up where Ben opened his. And you've used a CR2032, which is not only user replaceable, but that's a battery you can buy at the supermarket. And does that give it extended life as well, I presume, with it?
No, so like this is two things that were a bit complicated. So the 2032 battery should hypothetically give it extended life, and it should be a longer battery than 3 years. We say it's a minimum of 3 years because the factory can't account for all the ridiculous things that we want this to do. And so there's obviously temperature, and we can go into the high accuracy quartz kind of like conversation, but we don't need to go that far down the road to realize like electronics are going to be sensitive to all sorts of things, and battery life will depend on that. It's kind of like when you look on your instructions on anything that comes with batteries, it says like this is the operating temperature and stuff. And so the 2032 with that battery capacity is huge, but also it means that we're able to keep that module pretty much for sure running. Is just to ensure that there's sufficient and regular power, and that, it's user replaceable. I think a lot of people were talking about, this would be great if it was solar, and we agree it would be great if it was solar, but the R&D and the cost of developing the module increases exponentially. And when we talk about production numbers for this, it's already substantially larger than typically comfortable. And so like that aspect of it, we figured the closest analog to solar is like incredibly easy to replace battery. And that was actually the primary function. Part of it was obviously electronics and conversation with what was customizable, what was reasonable and accessible, and its strengths and weaknesses. But when it came down to serviceability, that's the primary function, is that like we want you to be able to open it and no questions asked. And that's part of the guaranteed for life aspect of the module, is that like, since it's custom for us and we think it's user serviceable, we'll replace them. That's fine.
I definitely want to get to some of the crazy things that you've done when you were testing this watch. But before that, I just have to give like a special shout out to the box it comes in. You've used one of these Toyo steel cases. I am a huge fan of these. I've probably got 3 or 4 behind me. I've keep all my watch tools in there. I've got my watch straps in another one. I don't know if many people know about these boxes, but they are actual tool boxes, and you've chosen to put a tool watch in there. I think that's really is a really cool touch.
A lot of the brands that we've seen, like again, like G-Shock, I'll nod to them here, is like they've had collabs with Toyo, being a heritage Japanese tool brand, innovating in the space of making a toolbox. So I'm glad you brought it up, Sam. I think it's something that isn't always appreciated, is like that box is won a design award for being the first metal box to have no sharp corners or edges, and it's airtight. And so we thought that it was kind of a cool thing if we could create packaging that wasn't a waste and collaborate with a historic brand to kind of like move the needle a little bit more, to elevate it a little bit more. And Supreme has worked with Toyo and G-Shock, so it was really a big aspiration. And so when they were open to us customizing for packaging, one of the things that we wanted to do was with our other watches, we offer a black home pouch or some other pouch that has utility to it. It's not always universally understood what those pouches are for. Like I have one here actually. And so this is one of the ones that my personal one that I use. And so I put my pen in there and some cables and things. And so people might not use that, but a toolbox is something that's really easy to use. And so one of the things that we thought is that with our entry level product, we wanted to give people just like an out of the world unboxing experience where they know that that's not garbage. In case you bought something that was like $200 and you're like, oh, this packaging might be junk, you know that you're not going to throw this away. And a G-Shock tin is all good and dandy, and I'm not trying to be a jerk. It's like, I appreciate them. I'm a G-Shock collector and stuff, but really that doesn't have a great utility, that size tin. And so we want to invest in our customer and the future of the product by just saying like, yeah, this is a really good utility toolbox, like introduce you to the brand Toyo, and then you can integrate it into the other toolboxes you have as well. And they all stack, which is kind of cool. And then the other thing was that in the instance that people do buy multiple UTDs, we want people to have a value proposition as well as a storage thing. So you see the foam and stuff like that in there really allows you to transport whatever watch safely.
I forgot to ask you when we were talking about the module about the backlight, because I've not seen a backlight that works like this. We used to see in Timex's Indiglow or the backlight or the mini LED that some of the G-Shocks has. But this illuminates the numbers, but on a positive display. Is that unique to you? I've not seen that before.
No, so there is a variety of modules that come off the shelf from like the Chinese suppliers, the Chinese manufacturers that use this type of display. And so when we looked at it, it was quite ingenious in our opinion. It's quite unique. I think that those things like Indiglow and things like that are quite restricted, and so this is an innovation from the manufacturers that have explored different things. And when we looked at it, we were like, this is great.
Let's get to the good part now, where you absolutely like battered these watches, didn't you? Talk about some of the testing that you did with these.
Obviously, like we've seen the G-Shock videos, and that's where it comes from. Like we've seen the hockey thing, and we were inspired by that. Like everyone's like, G-Shock did this 50 years ago or whatever in our comments. It's like, yeah, they did, but like, who's doing it now? Like, I would love to do the takes the licking and keeps on ticking thing. It's funny to kind of like bring back and do a callback to some of these iconic marketing things, but also there's a realism to them. And when we looked at kind of G-Shock's drop testing and stuff like that, obviously ISO testing as well as G-Shock's more controlled environment testing is fantastic, and they have access to all those things. But I'm like, yeah, we can just have fun with it, kind of the way that G-Shock did and Timex did previously. And we designed this watch in Canada, so I thought it'd be funny to kind of go ahead with the True North tested thing and really test it here in kind of low temp and different things. And so it kind of just started as the idea of how do you have a fun way to test like -40 for over 24 hours and wind, because that's the likelihood that someone might use it in a military setting, or if they're working outside on the rigs or whatever they're doing. Like I couldn't come up with a scenario where we would have access in a reasonable way. And in Edmonton, where I'm based, it gets to -40 literally for weeks every year, all the time. And so I was like, oh, I'll just strap it to my truck and check it for like, every hour for 24 hours. And we'll just partway through that, I'll drive it on the highway for 100 kilometers per hour for like an hour and see what happens. And those are the things where I think we kind of figured this is the fastest way to doing extreme testing. And when we started documenting it, it was like, oh, this is lots of fun. And we started reaching out to our friends, and they wanted to kind of get involved. And that was kind of one of the things where we thought, how do we get to 30 feet drop? And we wanted to drop it every day and things like that, because we figure that's the most common drop is going to be 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet. And so we'll just show people dropping it from that height. But obviously the marketing aspect of is like, how high can you go? And so once we hit the G-Shock height of 30 feet out a window, so I don't know if you caught it online, but they threw it out of a parkade and just kind of threw it off and yeeted it over onto a cement pad, and it turned out fine. And, we're not recommending people do it, but it's possible, it could happen.
Even at the 375, it's still significantly cheaper than the equivalent G-Shock. I know we keep mentioning G-Shock, but this to me, especially on the live streams, we have a back and forth about what is a homage watch versus what is a copy. And this is a true homage, isn't it? You are paying honor to a design and moving it forward. You're taking inspiration without imitation. What immediately drew me to it when I saw the early
Thank
renders.
you. I mean, it's something that I hope, like, there's definitely the one colorway, the blackout, which obviously is a callback to Casio. And when we do everyone's asking, but we have a positive display version of that coming in just a couple months. And it's inevitable. Like, we're going to do that, but at the same time, we have something in the books in the future that's going to look a lot more maybe homage Timex in the same case. And it's easy for everyone to see that this is homage Casio because of the bezel color or like the insert colors and stuff like that. But in reality, like you said, if you call back other digital watches like Sunto or Timex, they're actually really similar layouts and designs as well. Like, and there's little details of each of those things that we've integrated, but you don't know because the colors haven't gotten there yet. And so I'm excited for people to kind of do that same thing. It makes us laugh a little bit, because it's all of these things. The world of dive watches isn't just Submariners, and just like digital watches, it's not just G-Shock. Of course, it's the king that we try to honor and homage, but in reality, we stand on the shoulders of giants and move the industry forward through that.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you did digital. Huiy, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Head over to the RZEWatches.com. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Hope this was a great insight into this new watch, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews. Thanks, guys. Bye.